welcome to the Production Talk podcast with me, Yarn of mixartist.com.au. In this podcast series, we celebrate the modern way of producing music. We want to talk about all things related to songwriting, recording at home, and music production. So if you produce your music at home, this is the place to be. Please subscribe and recommend this podcast to all your friends. This is the Production Talk podcast, episode 33. Thank you for tuning in again to the next episode of the Production Talk podcast. Before we begin this episode, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land that the following conversation was recorded on. That's the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Also, before we head into the interview today, I would like to just give a quick shout out. If you had a chance to listen to last week's episode, you may be aware that we're dealing with a flood crisis in the area. And if you can, please go to episode 32. That's last week's episode. And in the show notes, there are a couple of links if you feel like helping. Please click one of the links, and any donations, any support is welcome in the local community. Good. Okay, but today we would like to talk about something else. I was very grateful to having been introduced to Marc Brown, founder and CEO of byta.com, which I incorrectly pronounced byta in the interview because it's spelled with a Y. My apologies for that. Not only is byta.com an interesting product for musicians, but Marc also has an extensive background in music marketing and promotion. So that's why I am very grateful to find some time with Marc today. Let me cut the short. Let's go straight to the good stuff. Here is my interview with Mr. Marc Brown of byta.com. With me today is Marc Brown, founder and CEO of byta.com.
Yep.
And Marc, you are joining us from Stockholm. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So I'm about I think I'm about 9 or 10 hours behind you over there in Australia.
It's about that, yes. And for you, it must be winter.
Yeah. There's been a bit of snow, but I was away. I was traveling. And I came back and there's no snow left, but we've had a fair amount. You're right. Yeah.
You had a fair amount. Well, for us in Australia, it's summer, but it's been a rainy summer so far. So I'm shivering here. It's only 26 degrees. Quite different.
But for the audience, he's sitting, we've got video on and I can see he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt. So it's really not that bad. So he doesn't need any sympathy.
That's right. This is probably the longest distance interview I've done so far. I've had an interview with Liverpool, and I think Stockholm is just a little bit further from us here. So that's a little record for this podcast as well.
Maybe it could be the same distance because we're a little higher up. Than the UK, the UK is further east, but we're higher up. True. So it's about the same. But I used to live in the UK, so maybe we're tied. Yeah.
Okay. Look, Marc, please tell us a bit about yourself, your history, and why did you choose to pursue a career in music?
So as you introduced me, my name is Marc. I'm the founder of a platform for sending and receiving digital audio called byta.com. And that it's an interesting question about like why I chose music, because I think a lot of people will agree, a lot of listeners will agree that you don't really choose these kind of things. So I grew up in this accent. It's Canadian. It's not American. So I grew up in Canada and I was really into music from a very young age. And I just got into loads of bands. I'm 47, so 80s bands when I was really young. And then I started going to gigs, as you do. And then I moved from one city to another in Canada. And when I was there, I was in high school. And I'm like, why doesn't this city get as many good bands as touring as where I lived before? And I started to have all these questions about why is it this way? Why? Like, why? And so I didn't know what a tourer was, like touring or routing or primary markets or secondary markets or tertiary markets, the way people prioritize which cities bands play in. And so then I went to university on the east coast of Canada. So I'd sort of lived in the middle of Canada, moved out west, moved east.
Okay.
And it was there that I was in university. I was going to more gigs. I lived in this really small town, and we go into the bigger city, which was actually quite small relatively. And there were lots of bands in the middle of the 90s. This city called Halifax was called the Seattle of the North. Lots of bands got signed to Sub Pop, the same label as Nirvana. And it was around then that I started to think like it'd be cool to work in music. So I just liked music, and I thought, hey, I'm not a musician. Like, I'm not going to be a producer. I'm not going to do those kind of things. But I could totally help in some way. And so do you see what I mean? Like, I never thought, why did I choose music? Like, I like art and all that kind of stuff. So it's just what I connected with very early on. And then when it came to working in and around music, I just thought that was sort of the next step. University, at that time, I didn't like learning that way. I'm like, I'm desperate to get out and start doing something. So I basically dropped out of university to start volunteering in an independent record label. So I don't think I chose anything. I sort of gravitated towards it or ended up doing it, but it came quite early. I think I was 19 or 20 when I started volunteering at that record label.
Okay. And then you moved around. You moved to the UK, and now you're in Scandinavia. So what made you leave Canada?
Well, so I worked at this label for a handful of years, and this is sort of pre-internet, or the internet was in its infancy. And so and we ran a festival, and I toured with bands all over North America. And then
cool.
That label wasn't able to put out as many records anymore. So I was thinking, what should I do? And I thought, maybe I can move to the States, or maybe I can move to Toronto. But back then in the mid 90s, you couldn't get arrested if you were a Canadian band internationally. No one cared about Canadian bands, unlike the way it is now. No, it's crazy. It's changed so much.
Okay.
Yeah, it's changed so much. So I thought, okay, well, I had just been over to Europe, and I had just been to London. I thought, well, why don't I move to London? And again, it's sort of like, I just thought, that sounds like a smart move. So I moved to London in 1998, and we could talk about that in a bit. But then I moved to Sweden, to Stockholm in 2016, and that was right after sort of Brexit. And I thought, part of it is because byta, we're a distributed team. We don't have an office. So Jen, my co-founder, who lives in Australia, actually, just outside Melbourne on the coast.
Oh, yeah, right.
She's like, I'm moving to Melbourne, she said. And I'm like, this is a disaster. This is a handful of years ago. But she moved, and there was no problems, and we did everything online, and it was easy. And so I thought, well, if she can move to Australia, I can move to Sweden. So that's, again, the reason I just decided to do that.
Fantastic.
And I've been here for 5 years, basically, yeah.
Yeah, wow, cool. Fantastic. Just show us or talk to us about some of your highlights of your career. What bands have you worked with, and in what roles? You mentioned a festival earlier. What were your highlights?
Yeah, so a highlight is always the first job you get.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's you don't think it's even possible. How can I be around something I like all the time? So I worked at this small label in Halifax, and it was an artist-run label. So again, mid-90s, how many artist-run labels were there? That was a real highlight, and getting to tour all over North America. But then when I moved to London in 98, I worked at a record distributor for a bit. And then I worked at Creation Records, which is, I don't know if anybody who's listening is going to know about it. That way, the guy who started, this guy named Alan McGee, he signed Oasis and Primal Scream and Super Furry Animals and Teenage Fan Club.
Wow.
And it was basically one of the most important independent labels in UK history. And so I only worked there for a couple of years, the last couple of years. But that was crazy to meet all those people and to, people who have not only made good music, but have made good music over a long period of time, and like culturally relevant music in a way that is abnormal. Like, it doesn't happen that often. It's, and I think that was crazy working there. And then after Creation, Alan McGee left and he started a new company called Pop Tones. And that was more of an artist. I was about to say artist focused label, but Alan has always been an artist focused person. So, but then I started doing, that's when I started doing radio plugging, radio promotion. Where, you try to get songs on the radio, just like you do for press. And it's quite important in the UK. Even today with streaming, it's still important. And the first band that sort of blew up there was this Swedish band called The Hives. And it was one of the first bands I did as a radio plugger. It was crazy. And that went really well, like top 10 album, top 5 album. And that was a highlight because you're like, oh my God, like I played a part in having this go well. Like, I can't believe that I'm involved. Like, it's crazy. So, and then I left there and I started my own radio promotion boutique, radio and TV promotion company. And the highlights there, I did, million selling bands, #1 records, worked with like Yoko Ono, Booker T. We did some TV. I loved getting people on. There was this TV show in the UK called Later with Jules Holland, which was very, like, they had all the best bands across a wide variety of genres, like 5 different artists a week. And to get someone on that was super interesting. Like Booker T, who's famous for keyboard player, like he had never been on it until I worked with him. So stuff like that, you just think, wow, like how the hell did I end up in this situation? Well, so it was things like that I think that you just get to be there when things are happening and meeting people who have done exciting things. Like I just see myself as a bit player in a much larger thing. So I like, so just to be a bit of a part of that kind of stuff is pretty exciting, really.
Okay. Say, when it comes to promotion and getting songs to radio stations, what advice would you have for musicians today? Should they hire a company, or can musicians also do a bit of that themselves? At what stage in a band's career would it be advisable to actually hire a professional for promotion? When do you know you're question. Ready for
it? Okay. So this kind of question is very common. In fact, as I was saying, but just before we started, like I was in London this week. I was doing talks at, when I was young, there weren't any music schools. There weren't schools where you could go learn how things work. And I think that's really good now that they're all over the world, that you can learn the basics of how all the parts go together, where instead of sort of learning on the fly like I did. And I was in London and I did 4 talks over a couple of days to students. And the one talk I did twice a couple days ago is exactly about all this kind of stuff. What you're asking. And I think radio or press or anything like that, learning when you need that kind of stuff is different for everyone.
Yeah, of course.
Is the hard answer to hear. So the way, what I discuss when I do talks about this, I specifically say it's like, as an artist or an artist manager, anybody, working as support artist, it's like you need to think about here and there. So I'm here as an artist and I want to go there. But the idea of here and there are unique for every artist. So when you say when is the right time, it's like saying all artists are the same. And so that's a very hard thing for people to get around, that there's not a straight path forward, right? So what I like to say to people, I come from a DIY, do-it-yourself background, that I think you can do everything yourself initially, and you should do.
Okay.
In the sense that, it's easy to take if you have, I don't have a car, let alone a driver's license. But if you take a car to a mechanic, you don't know how the car works. You're relying on them. And that's right, a good thing. You're hiring you're hiring a professional. Professionals are good. But there's nothing wrong with figuring things out a bit for yourself. And I find the biggest problem is that artists and people who are newer to working in the music ecosystem they don't have the confidence that they can do things themselves. And I also tell people when I do these talks that a lot of people actually want to hear from artists themselves if you approach it properly. So the key is, how do you get in touch with people? Like, reaching out to people, like sending them emails, DMing them on Insta. People like that if it's sincere and you say what you need is, hey, I do this. I like you because of this. Like if someone likes your podcast, they get in touch with you. They say, hey, I like that episode. Can you give me advice on this? You talked about this. It's the same sort of aspects that you would have with friends or meeting new people. It's the same. You work the same way in music. And then when it comes to your question about when do you hire someone, it really depends on what you're doing. Like you could hire someone because you have no idea what you're doing in a certain area. Like that's an easy one. Well, I just don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about radio. But then that costs money. So you need to decide if I do this, is it gonna get me some results? Because it's not necessarily all about the money, but you want to make sure that you're just not blowing money here or there and everywhere. So that's the first one. I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I got to find someone who knows something. I have to pay them. Fair enough. The next one is about maybe, do I need someone now or do I need them later? And that really depends on how much you can accomplish yourself and where you want to focus your time. So maybe you want to hire that one person who in that area that you think you might do well in. Because another thing to think about is some bands, and I talk about this a lot in my talks, is some bands or artists, they're never going to get played on the radio. Like a death metal band is not going to get played on the radio, so it doesn't matter. So the answer is never hire anyone.
Depends on the station. But then there are some, but not many, of course.
But do you know what I mean? To have an impact in radio, you want to get played in the daytime and all that kind of stuff. So so it's those kind of questions that I think you need to ask yourself, and the answers, as much as I've given a vague response, the answers will come up. Okay. They'll bubble up. If you ask those questions to yourself and talk about it with the people you work with, like your producer, or your manager, or people in the band, I think those, you don't need to do everything right away, would be my answer. So you don't need to just get lots of money and spend it all at once. You can do things on a shoestring budget and learn to understand how things work yourself. And the key is the confidence that you can figure some stuff out yourself, really.
Yep. That makes perfect sense. So as a music promoter, I would assume that all your contacts, the people you know, those are your assets. That's something that you can build in a business around. But for a band trying to promote themselves, they think about a TV station or radio station. Do you just pick up the phone and call them and ask who's in charge? Or how do you get to the right person? Have you got any recommendations how to cut through?
That is a good... Yeah, that is a good question. And I find you can do a lot of research online.
Okay.
Just about what radio shows are right for your music. Because so when I discuss that here and there thing, where you are, knowing where you're at, you've got to know what kind of music you make.
Yes.
Who you are, where do you fit in the wider context? And then you think, okay, well, what are the bands that I like? Or artists that I like, or musicians that I like, where do they get support? And this could be in radio and TV and press, online, anything. And you can research a lot of that via like social media. So following people. So for example, if you're an independent artist in Australia, you're looking at Triple J, and then you go in and look and find out what shows are right. Again, I refer to if you're a death metal artist, you're not going to get played on the pop show. But if there is a specialist, like in the UK, the Radio 1 have a specialist metal show, which is very important, very influential.
Cool.
So you can sift through that a bit more and get down into what the options might be. And then, you can reach out, like radio presenters are very used to and open to being contacted by people. And if you find a way to get in touch with them and send them a link to your music and they like it, they'll put you in touch with the other people. So they'll say, hey, this is my producer. This is the person who works on the show. And then in press, if you read articles about bands you like, there you can find those people's email addresses. So everybody gets frustrated by these kind of responses because it means it's hard work. But that's what you sort of got to do early on. You got to teach yourself some stuff. And then I guarantee it'll pay off later when you've learned a little more yourself and you look to hire people.
Fantastic. Look, Marc, this is phenomenal advice. I learned a lot for myself just now there. And it makes perfect sense to me. So it's actually a couple of straightforward steps that everybody can take. You just got to start doing it. There's no secret source, and there's not a trade secret that is kept from the public. It's just something that everybody can do. And I guess a lot of bands just don't do it. You just need to get started. No,
and I think it's an access to knowledge. It's an access to knowledge thing, and you sort of mentioned like when I did it, because I don't do radio promotion anymore, but when I did it, you said my currency is the people I know. They're my assets. But what it is it's the relationship that I had with those people. So I mentioned I was in London. I met up with people, a couple friends who I've worked together. One of them was involved. He worked at a radio station when I plugged the Hives 20 years ago. And the other guy did radio for years, and now he runs one of the larger record companies. And those, what the two things that when you hire someone, they should have are the connections, those relationships that you build up over time. So it means that the person you're hiring knows the people they're interacting with. And then also that person has experience in what works and what doesn't work. And I think the big thing for artists and independent musicians is this idea of timelines. It sounds super boring, but you need to have a timeline, and you need to know when to contact people. And when you hire someone, in theory, you're hiring an expert.
Yep.
Who says, hey, I've done this so many times before in a good way. Why don't we do this? We can do that. We can do that. And that's all stuff that you won't know generally. Or you'll be like, oh, I knew a bit of that, but because you were teaching yourself. So those are the things that you're getting. It's like, advanced knowledge of how things work and the ability to get into contact with the people, like have a warm introduction where someone says, hey, I'm working this new record. I know you like this kind of music. Would you listen to it and tell me what you think? And the better those relationships, the easier it is. But that's not to say that you can't build your own relationships from the start, for sure.
Okay. Look, this is really, really valuable information. So I like that a lot. Radio plays, of course, are very important, but nowadays it's also a lot about playlists, especially on the big streaming platforms. And I found that it's a little bit trickier to find out who the person is who sets up or adds songs to playlists on Apple or Spotify. What's different there?
That's a very good question. And I actually talk about this as well in my, in my talks. And so the idea of, byta is a tool for sending and receiving digital audio, right?
Yep.
And then we also have this thing called How We Listen, which is an interview series about how people find and listen and experience new music. And our mission statement as a company is to give artists and their teams the tools and the knowledge to succeed. And the tool is byta and the knowledge is How We Listen. But How We Listen started out of this idea. It was this blog interview series, and it's turned into, we do monthly events and all this kind of stuff. But the reason we started that initial interview series was because I got super frustrated by all the stuff we're talking about. So someone says, you go to a conference as a newer artist and someone says, oh, well, you can just hire me for £1,000, $2,500 Australian dollars, and I'll just do all your press. And it's like, well, is that right for every new artist? No, it's not. But then also Spotify and Apple Music, they love to tell you, Deezer, they love to tell you, look, if you upload your music to our platform, the algorithm is going to get you noticed, or you're going to get on a playlist and everything's going to be great. Well, you're laughing. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the thing about playlists is the idea of a playlist is nothing new, because that's how it works in radio, right? So in radio, you start getting played on specialist radio in the evening. And then as your music becomes more and more familiar, it gets played more and more in the daytime. And then it goes up in rotation. That's the way it works. And that's the way most playlists would work probably on Spotify. Like the tracks are ordered in a certain way. And so you want to get on these. No doubt it's a good thing. But the mistake people make is they think, I'm going to get on a playlist and then everything else is just going to go well. Like I'm going to have to, I can lean back, and everything's great.
That's right.
Do you see what I mean? And that's understandable. That's understandable that people feel that way. But I talk about
it's just a milestone, but it's not the end of it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I talk about how, I say this quite often, like the people who are supporting your record, they might take a lead on something, like you might get a piece of press before anybody else. You might get a break, but they're also expecting to see other people be interested in it, right? And this is no different than when I was working in normal radio playlists there. If they put a record on the radio and they take it, they give it a lot of support early on. And then they see no one else is playing it or writing about it, or the band isn't touring. They say, well, why are we supporting this artist? There's not a lot else going on. Maybe it's not connecting with the audience. And so what you want to be thinking about as an artist, or anybody who supports artists, is these playlists are part of an overall strategy, right?
Yes.
And the contacting them is difficult because it is a bit weirder in that way. And then the other problem with playlists is some of them do take money to get paid, like they get paid to listen to stuff and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's the thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's difficult to figure all that out, but also I think it's very important that people don't focus too much on playlists being the most important thing, or paying to get on playlists. Because again, there's a lot of these platforms that say, oh, we can get you guaranteed plays. Do you see what I mean? So
yes.
It's very tough how you get on playlists. Like, distributors can help you. There's lots of different ways to do it, but I would never want to speculate depending on, what kind of music it is and all that kind of stuff. Again, vague answer, but there's important stuff in there about that you need to have a broader understanding of what you're doing first, instead of just thinking playlist is the only way forward.
Yes. Okay. Of course. So what you're saying is that playlists are one element of the bigger picture, and it needs to
correct,
fit in together. Yes. And if for whatever reason they don't take your song on a playlist, it's not the end of the world. Just keep going and do other things.
Yeah.
Yep. Good.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Fantastic. So let's talk about your business. So where are you at? It's a newer business, if I understand correctly. You went into beta stage, and it's now public. And the website looks phenomenal. It looks super professional. It's super clear. It's very attractive, I find. How is business going for you so far?
It's good. So we built our company up as we bootstrapped it. So we're an independent artist. And so we started it, and it was a side project for a handful of years. And then about 2 years ago, we got some investment, $2 million, and everybody quit their jobs and started building on it, working. It was a full-time project. So if things have changed radically in the last 18 months, And so
Well,
we've had time to dedicate to all the things we need to dedicate to marketing, to letting people know we exist, to developing the platform. So it's amazing. It's been an amazing 2 years, but it's very difficult work. It's just like being an artist.
of course,
It takes time to build things up.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then it takes time to get noticed, and the word needs to spread.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it costs. You don't want to spend too much money, but you can't not spend any money. It's a balance for sure.
Okay. Say, would you mind to just phrase in your own words? What are the problems you're solving with your website that is attractive to musicians?
The way I explain it is that music is the currency, right? So artists, they make and create music, and up to 60,000 tracks a day are uploaded to Spotify every day. So when I started, it was hard to get your record into a record store, and that was the challenge. But now it's easy to release your music, but no one knows your music exists. And so we say there are 3 stages, creation, promotion, discovery. And so you're sending files and streams back and forth as soon as you start collaborating, be it as, artists, musicians, sending stuff to studios, all about it. Then there's the promotion phase where if you and I are making an album together, we have a manager, we do all this kind of stuff. They start sending it to other people. And then there's this discovery phase, which is people, unlike the general public, people who work in the music ecosystem, they're always receiving a lot of music. It's, hey, what do you think of this? You work at a radio station, or you're a manager, or you're a producer, you have a studio. Hey, can I send you my music? I need some advice, right? So people are reaching out to people privately, sending and receiving digital audio. And so what byta does is it makes it easy to send and receive digital audio in a clean, simple, and secure way. So it doesn't matter if you're collaborating, you're promoting, or you're just listening to stuff. We make all those things easier, which the ultimate hope is that all those things become easier. People find it easier to listen to music. There's less time wasted because everybody spends time clicking on links, downloading this, doing that, different file formats. And we just make all that easier. Our focus is on making that process as easy as possible for as many people as possible. And the biggest group of those people are creators. There's millions, tens of millions of creators, and they all have this problem.
Okay. So let's say where, artists previously used something like, let's say, Dropbox or Google Drive, which is quite acceptable, I guess, to shuffle WAV files for and back, but it's maybe not a cool platform to then later share a finished project, because the streaming quality is not good, and it's it's difficult to protect. And you're solving all of this in one step. People wouldn't have to go to, let's say, SoundCloud to share their finished projects. So you don't need one project tool to produce and another one to share. It's all in byta.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So something like Dropbox and WeTransfer, they are good, but they're built for all different file types.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? Like, so WAV files, for example, Dropbox doesn't read WAV metadata, so you can't type in the artist name into the metadata. It's terrible for streaming. It's very bad. It's unresponsive. You can't convert. So if you use Dropbox all the time, you're going to have a WAV version, an MP3 version, all that kind of stuff. So those are the problems that people face every day. And then SoundCloud is a good example. They started out sort of doing what we're doing, but they sort of gave up on that, and they're more about it being a streaming platform now, a platform for releasing music. And they're more streaming focused, but their streaming isn't that secure, and the sound quality isn't that good. So what you end up is in this situation where you're sending a Dropbox link and a SoundCloud link, and the user experience for that is a pain in the ass. Whereas you're exactly right, byta does that. It's one app that does that in a clean, simple, and secure way.
Fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. Can you explain in a bit more detail why we need to protect our audio files? So, for example, I use Google Drive, for example, for a lot of my files, and I usually thought that they are fairly well protected there. It's just between me and my client. What extra layers of protection would one need?
I think what's important to think about with that, like generally they are secure. I would never say that Google's not secure, but what happens a lot of the time with, say, something like Google Drive or WeTransfer, or no more with Box and Dropbox, is that you end up in a situation where, how would I explain it? Like that you share something with someone and they have access to the top level folder, and then you put something in that folder and you forget that you gave them access. And then suddenly everybody's got access to all your stuff. And I'm not saying that people are dodgy in any way, shape, or form. Absolutely not. What I mean more is that piracy is not necessarily what you're worried about. You're generally much more worried about access, controlling your narrative, making sure that you get the music to the people you want to get it to on the timeline that is appropriate for you. And that's what you need to think about. I think artists need to think about when it comes to security. You want to make sure that if you send something to someone, they can maybe only download it once if you're concerned about that. Or that you maybe only want them to have a stream for 24 hours or for 3 days, or it expires after a week, so that people don't forward it around to people. So those are all things you can do to limit people's access while making it easy for them to listen, but saying, hey, this is the way I want to limit it, because where you are with your artists, maybe Google Drive is fine, but when they go to the next stage and a manager is sending it out to different places, maybe they don't want everybody to have access to the files, or maybe they only want them to have limited access. And so that's, when I think about security, that's what I think is most important.
Look, I think that's a really smart concept, and it ties in with other things we've discussed on this podcast already, especially episode 15, when I spoke about the digital infrastructure that artists should set themselves up, and to make a file vault like record companies used to do. And maybe that is exactly the tool that people want here. So that's a really interesting concept. It's a really interesting concept. I guess every time we need to talk about sound and the internet, sound quality is probably a subject that comes up sooner or later. And you mentioned earlier, that there are a couple of platforms that don't sound as good as others. Where would you personally set the bar? Which platforms sound okay and which ones do not sound okay to your ears?
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk about what other people tell me, because I don't think it's fair for me to comment on other platforms. I hear a lot of artists talk about how SoundCloud processes their audio. They do something with it. So I think the one that people use for streaming is SoundCloud, for sure. What I also think, though, is that a lot of people don't need very high-res audio for when they reference things. So in what you do in your role, mixing, mastering, all that kind of stuff, it's very important. But for a quick reference of how the track sounds, as in, if you're doing edits or you're just giving it a quick listen, a lot of people listen on their computers and won't be able to notice much of a audio quality difference in a way. So if you're streaming at 320, it's pretty good. The idea that you want to stream a WAV file, you absolutely do not, because the file is so big. It would be a nightmare to stream that from a data point of view. We don't live in a world where that would be the case yet. And even then, listening to WAV files on your computer, if you don't have good headphones, if you're not using, an adapter for your headphone, like I can't remember what they're called, for to make sure you get even better quality out of your computer. So I think that that's the hard thing, that there's some pretty bad audio in certain places, but it's also that it doesn't need, I don't want anybody to think it needs to be high res all the time. There are certain use cases, and you can't replicate going to a studio, for one thing. Of course. Yeah. Just because you can listen to it on your computer doesn't mean it's going to sound good. So I think that's the other thing, the context around what you listen to and where, and what you really need. Because I think a lot of people make a mistake of thinking, Well, I need to send a WAV file to someone and they need to listen to that lossless on their computer, but then it doesn't really sound that good on a computer anyway. And so that's sort of I have a much more nuanced view of it.
Thank you very much. That is really good. That's really good. But would you agree that the tendency generally seems to be that the streaming services seem to improve quality? I'm just, thinking about Apple's step to high resolution audio. Do you reckon there will be some kind of a trend in the industry that others may follow at some stage?
I found so I predominantly listen to a lot of music on Spotify and with headphones and just normal Apple AirPods. And I didn't use AirPods for years until 2 years ago. And what I think is really fascinating is that I'm always impressed what good it sounds. I think that the technology has improved markedly from just because I have it set to highest quality on Spotify. So what's that, 320? And every once in a while I'm like, oh my God, did it sound this good when I used to listen to this record on vinyl or on CD? So I found that things, even the average listening experience has improved quite a bit. Definitely.
Good. Thank you very much. That's a good discussion to have. You've been in the music industry for such a long time now. What is your prediction for the next 2 years? How is the music industry going to change? Now, we had big changes due to COVID and, everything shifted online. We are in this constant state of motion and changes. If you had to, guess or look into your crystal ball, what would you expect for the next 2 years?
I think all the buzzwords are still out there. So artist rights, artists getting paid, all this stuff about NFTs, but I think the key to think about is in the same way that I discussed the traditional radio versus getting on a Spotify playlist. The game is still the same. The game has not changed in 20 years since I've worked in music. You have artists who are trying to get noticed and build a career, and what that means is that it's like, how do you do that? Who are the people you contact? What are the ways you do that? And I think that's the thing that's always changing. How do you create the awareness about who you are and what you do, and how do you work together? And that's so when you think about TikTok, people go on about that in music discovery. It's like these are newer ways that things happen, and that's the way to do it, really. That you just need to understand all these newer things are happening and think, not I need to do this because everybody else is doing it, but be thinking, this new thing's come along, is it good for me? Or how can I make sure I get paid properly? Do I have the information I need, all the metadata, all that kind of stuff? So there's an education part going on that we're making it easy. People are making it easy and easier to get paid if your music becomes successful, popular, but also that the tools of how do I get noticed and how do the music discovery thing is always changing. And so as an artist or anybody who works again with artists, you're just thinking, what are these things that are coming up? Are they right for me? Are they not right for me? And just thinking, though, that the game is the same, as it always was, is that you want your music to connect with people, and you want to build that context around who you are as an artist. And that's the game, basically. And that's the same. So no matter what's happening with all the buzzwords and the prediction, there's always new stuff happening all the time. The thing to think about is do these buzzwords apply to me? And can they help me do what I need to do to get to where I want to go as an artist?
Oh, that's very good. I really like that, because that gives a certain, it's a certainty in many ways. You've worked with so many bands in the past and different artists. Over time, did you realize that there were certain, let's call it personal or professional traits that are common for the more successful bands? Or maybe also, on the other end, maybe certain character traits that bands share that don't get as far? Is there anything that successful artists have in common? I guess that's my question. Did you notice anything?
They work hard. They work hard.
Yep.
Like to be a musician is you need to be creative. Like you can't change that, but you also need to work hard. Like the artists that I work with, like the ones that were at number one, like the schedule is grueling. The amount of interviews and all that kind of stuff. And those are the ones that the people that are most successful are the most driven. The most creative and the most driven, and those two factors at play together is what causes success. I think that is just you've got to work so hard, and you can't give up. And the road is sort of long and never ending. But it's the commitment to what they do, commitment to their artistry, and obsession about that is important, I think.
Okay. Yep. That makes perfect sense to me. That's really good. Let's just bring it back to your business one more time. You've got different tiers.
Yes.
There's a free entry level. And I will definitely put a link into the show notes if that's okay with you, where people can sign up. Yeah. And then there are higher tiers that cost a little bit of money that have more features. What would you recommend those for? At what stage in an artist's career is it advisable to step up?
Well, what we offer, so having a free tier, that's called having a freemium model. That's the free version allows you to send, upload and share audio, and then it expires after 7 days and it's not stored in the cloud, right? So it just disappears after 7 days. And that's the way WeTransfer works. And I think that's very fair, that there are lots of people, like, say, for example, if you're just sending something to someone who's been in your studio or, you've been working with, they need to listen right away or download the tracks, and then they don't need it again. Easy. There's no reason why you should have to pay for a platform. I don't think anybody should have to pay. But then when our paid platforms or paid accounts get into things like when you want to upload something and keep it in the cloud and then decide when you're going to share it out instead of uploading over and over and over again. So that's for people who maybe have an album finished and they're going to do some promo over 6 weeks, 2 months, and it's easier to do it that way. And then so upload storage is the big one with paid accounts, and more flexibility with sharing. So you can decide what kind of sharing you want to do. Do the links expire? Do you create we call them universal links, like a private SoundCloud link, or do you want to have more security? And as you go up, there's 3 different plans. There's another 4th plan coming soon, paid plan. And that's really about control over security and features that if you say you do promotion like radio or press or anything like that, there's more additional features. But our most popular one is the creator plan, which is the first paid plan, because people just generally want upload storage and to control the different types of links they send out.
Okay. And I'm not quite sure if you want to answer this question, but you don't have to if you don't want to. But are we looking at a finished product here, or are you working on expanding it further, giving it more features?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. So this is software. Software is never finished. So what we did was when we got our investment, we did a load of stuff behind the scenes, under the hood. Then we launched a redesign in August of last year. And then every month for the next 5-6 months are new features. So we've got tons of new features coming. We've been waiting, a couple of those we've been waiting to build because we knew we needed them. A couple of those come from user feedback. So yeah, there's tons of new features to come. iOS app, Android app, all that kind of stuff. Definitely. So the work is never done.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. You shared so much valuable information today, and you mentioned earlier that occasionally you do talks at universities and so on. Is there an online presence for those talks? If anybody wants to hear more of what you have to share, is there a place where people could go?
That is a good question. I don't know how many of the school talks are online, but what I would suggest is byta.com/howwelisten. We could put that in the show notes.
Absolutely.
We do a monthly event. We're doing one like every month, basically towards the end of the month. I think it's the last Tuesday of every month. Like they can come to those. We've started putting that stuff up on YouTube. We don't really promote it. We've just started doing that. But I don't know if there's any of the talks I do. I do this one called The Artist's Journey. I do that a lot at conferences. That's what I did in London.
Okay. Well, it sounds fascinating, and I would definitely love to, watch it down here in Australia if I get a chance to find it somewhere. Yeah, cool.
You got to get me to come to Australia and do some talks live. That's the whole point.
Well, look, that would be amazing. Look, if you ever get down to Australia, let me know. Maybe we can organize something here, because I have a couple of contacts to universities. So maybe could literally work something out there. That sounds amazing.
That'd be great. Good. I'd love it.
Marc,
all right, cool.
Thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom with me and our listeners today. That's phenomenal stuff. I wish you all the best with byta.com. I'm going to promote it, of course, in the show notes and among our listeners. And I wish you all the best with this. It sounds like an amazing project.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Marc. That was an amazing interview. I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and experience. I hope all you listeners took something out for yourself today. There's probably a lot to learn about music marketing and promotion for most of us. So I really hope that you take the things Marc shared and take it into action. Don't just take it on board and listen passively. It is now up to you to think about how all of this applies to your own music career. And I challenge you to take practical, tangible steps and turn them into action. That's the most important part. It's not about getting everything right in the first place. It's about getting started more than anything else. Also, I would like to encourage you to review our episode number 15 about your digital marketing infrastructure. I believe that byta.com might be a suitable product for some of you, maybe all of you. Definitely check it out and see how this might tie into your marketing world. Good. Okay, for us, it's time to finish up. So thank you for listening in again. If you would like to contact me, or if you've got any questions, why don't you just join our Production Talk community group on Facebook? The link, of course, is in the show notes. You can also contact me via my website for all mixing services, and the URL, of course, is mixartist.com.au. So if you need any help mixing your music, please let me know. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And last but not least, please rate this episode in your podcast application. And I would really appreciate if you could please also leave a short written review. That would really make my day. Okay, good. That's all for now. Please remember to take action. I'll speak to you next week. Bye for now.